Welcome to Knowing Your Data. So this is a session about it's about GDPR and compliance as a headline, but it's also, and in fact, it's largely about understanding the data that your organization uses. We see this as a fundamental in data management, and fortunately, well, or unfortunately, depending on how you see it, a lot of people are very concerned about GDPR, and they have been since the legislation came out. We don't have that view. We think it's a really big enabler and it's a big opportunity for a lot of organizations to get to grips with the data they use. And hopefully, if nothing else, you'll come out of today's session having understood that as a concept, and feel a lot more comfortable and confident about looking at the data that your organization gathers and uses. So obviously 3.5 hours is a long time to be workshopping. So we're going to be taking a couple of breaks on the way. We've got 3 exercises, and there'll be a break after each of the first 2 exercises. If you need to step away at any point, though, please feel free to do that. There's going to be a bit of talking in between the exercises, so about a quarter of the time, probably. I expect that I'll be talking. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover we'll do some introductions to start with. And then we'll introduce the subject. We'll talk about the principles around managing data in your organization and managing personal data in particular. We'll do a short exercise around data in your business and try to uncover where that's coming from and what you're storing. Then there'll be a break. Then we'll talk about the legal gateways. This is the kind of meat of the GDPR, and this is about how the justification you use, the legal justification and the legal basis you have for processing personal data. I've looked at the list of organizations that are here today, or that registered on the course, and I know that some of you will have some special category data, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And after that, we'll do another gateway, we'll do another exercise around those gateways, then we'll talk about some tools and techniques, and then we'll help you build your own action plan, and then we'll aim to finish by 5:30 at the absolute latest. So let's see how that goes. What are objectives? So at the end of this session, we think you'll be able to describe how compliant your organization is with the GDPR, map out the data that your organization is using, storing and processing. You should be able to list the principles of GDPR for any future developments you do. We'll be giving you some cheat sheets and some downloadable content to take away with you around that. You should also be able to build your own action plan to get control of your organization's data and describe the ways that you can legally share data and have some idea of the tools and techniques for doing so. A bit of a caveat though, we're not lawyers. So myself and Lucy and Maria, who are facilitating the session, we're data architects rather than lawyers. So our approach is about giving you practical advice rather than legal advice. If you're dealing with any kind of very sensitive data, at some point you probably will need to consult a lawyer. Our aim in this workshop and in the couple of hours we've got together, we won't be able to solve that problem or avoid that for you, but we might be able to minimize it for you if that's the path that you're on. Also, some aspects of this subject are way too big to fit comprehensively into a half-day workshop. There will be links and further resources to support you as you go forward with that. In particular, some of the other beyond content will be relevant to you. I know that there's some cybersecurity sessions and modules, and we hope to signpost you to those as well, because security is an aspect of, it's a sort of slightly overlapping topic with data protection. It's a necessary thing, but we're not going to talk about that in detail today because that would gobble up the entire topic. Plus, there are better people to handle that kind of content. So let's do a few introductions. I'll introduce myself and Lucy, who's sort of co-presenter, and then I'd like to get a bit of an idea about who you are as well and about the people that are on the call. So I'm Martin Howitt and I'm co-founder of The Data Place. we're a social enterprise. We're based in Plymouth, and we have a mission to help people do better things with data. That means more ethical things to do with data. Lucy and I are your facilitators for the afternoon, and we're also joined by Maria McCann, who's just started with us, and so she's observing as well. It would be good to know who you are, and also your name and the organisation that you're with, and maybe your role, if that's possible. Lucy, do you want to just say a couple of words about yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Martin and I have been working together for a very long time. We're both ex-public sector, both used to work for the council. Martin is the enterprise architect of this organisation, and I'm the data scientist. We have been handling data in all its glory for a very long time. That doesn't mean we know everything. We will signpost you, but we're here to reassure you that a lot of this is common sense and the do as you would be done by kind of attitude. So yeah, that's us, that's me.
Thank you, Lucy. Kat and Annie, would you be able to introduce yourselves?
Happy to. Hi everyone, I'm Kat. I'm co-founder of Dot Project. We actually began our Dot Project journey with a GDPR slant, so I'm really looking forward to understanding what the landscape looks like now. Dot Project is a partner on Beyond. You all know a lot about the Beyond series, I'm sure. I've just posted in the chat actually a link to the cybersecurity. And as Dot Project, we're a cooperative supporting charities to thrive through the use of digital. I'll hand to Annie.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie, the other co-founder of Dot Project. So yeah, everything the same as Kat said. I guess one of my particular areas of focus, and particularly on Beyond, is doing the more tech mentoring. So we've got some one-to-one mentoring programs that we're delivering as well. So very much working around connecting organizations to various tech expertise as well, depending on where they are in their journey.
That's lovely, thank you. I can't see everyone because of the Zoom view I've got, but Paul Berry, I wonder if you'd be able to just introduce yourself briefly, just who you are and your organisation.
Yeah, I'm Paul Berry. I'm the Office and Business Manager for Breakthrough UK.
And what did Breakthrough UK do?
We're a not-for-profit organisation that works with disabled people, primarily in Greater Manchester at the moment.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I need a list somewhere of the participants. Hang on a minute, I'll get that.
Click on participants, Martin. It pops up at the side, in the sidebar.
Yeah, I know. I've lost my.
Got it?
I've lost my mouse. Hang on.
Has that cat got into your office again?
Yes.
He stole his pen last week. It took him half a day to get it back. I'm not even kidding.
Amy Bean. Yes, this is the first of 3 sessions that we're running with the Beyond programme, which is about managing data during the current situation that we're in. We're starting our 3 sessions with one on data protection and knowing the data, not because we think that it's got a particular zing to it or anything, but because we think that data is now such an essential part of running organisations that to some extent we all have to start with where we are. And that means understanding what we're currently doing with the data that we collect. I suspect that a number of the people in this room have got different kind of levels of expertise and experience with this topic and with data protection. I hope that we'll be able to help all of you move forward in some respect from wherever you are. We'll see how it goes. So just a very brief history about the Data Protection Act. That was launched in 1998, and of course, as the world's become more digitized since then, data protection itself as a discipline has evolved. The 2016 GDPR put privacy by design and default, and it was the first time it used those languages. It started to think about the way you design your internal processes as to being much more aware of what they were doing with data. And of course, a lot of organizations have the legacy of processing and operations that went back way before that. It wasn't intended to be difficult, and in fact, the people who wrote the GDPR wanted it to be helping organizations to realize the potential power that was in their data. So far, because the GDPR is an EU bit of legislation, so far we're the UK legislation that is paired with that is equivalent. So it's not affected by what's currently going on politically. There may be divergence in the future. That's something that we're keeping an eye on. So why would we do this? And I suppose in a nutshell, once you understand the data and you know that its limitations, you can start to use it. Data doesn't exist in a vacuum. It always represents something else. It always represents real things or people. And understanding how that works in your organization is the first step in your kind of a journey to using the data for better social impact, better organizational efficiency, and long-term success for your organization. The compliance thing is a bit of there's a kind of a carrot and stick here. The compliance is the stick, it's the lever to get you started on this journey. And compliance begins really with understanding what data you currently collect and how you're using it. There's also in later versions, in the later sessions we're running, we'll be talking a bit about using external data sets. And I think that that's really interesting. And when you start to combine your own internal data with those external and open data sets that are available. But if you don't know what data you've got, you can't do that. If your data isn't in good shape itself, then you can't do that either. And compliance is a way in, really, because everyone has to do this. So I think it's something GDPR in itself really has been quite good for our organisation, for our social enterprise, because people have got interested in data all of a sudden, and so it's been quite good for us. Okay. So compliance begins with understanding the data you currently collect and how you use it. It's not really any different to any other aspect of providing services. You do businesses in an ethical way, really. And you're charities, you're there to support people, and so it's important that you don't harm people, and you support people with your data collection processes as well as with the services that you provide to them. The principles of GDPR are just good practice, really, but as applied to data operations, with a fair few technical tweaks on the way. And of course, during the current pandemic situation, a lot of people have now shifted systems online. So this has resulted in even more need to understand what's happening with the data that your organization holds as it ends up on everyone's laptops. So I want to talk a bit about principles in the GDPR. Because we've said previously that these principles are just good organizational ethics, really. And there's a lot to say about how you might embed each of these into your organizational culture. That's probably not too much time for that today. We've got some books that we will recommend at the end, that we referenced at the end of this workshop. And we'll skip, but we will go through the principles quickly here. So what are those principles? You may have seen these before, some of them. Apologies if so. There are 7 of them. First one is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So, you want to do things that are legal as an organization, and you want to be fair to people, and you want to be clear about what you're doing. So you have to have the right to process the data. You mustn't compromise the data subject. Everyone needs to be clear about what's being done. This is 95% of everything that you do with your data, really. And I think everyone needs to be clear. That's a phrase you're going to be seeing quite a lot of this afternoon. We see good practice as being inclusive by definition. And by being as clear and open as possible about how data is being used, you're generating good relationships, you're getting good reviews, and you're getting increased levels of trust with the people that you work with, your partners, and with your clients. Second principle is purpose limitation. So this is about only processing the data that you need to, but it's also about processing using the data for the purpose that you say you're going to use it to. So why do you need to process people's personal data? You collect a piece of personal data, you have to have a reason to process it. You're not really supposed to change your mind about that. Once you've suited your purpose, you need to let the data go. So you need to be clear and upfront about this. You need to obtain a legal gateway for each purpose. Do you also process the data for other purposes? Don't do that. Say what you want to collect, what you want to process data for. It goes without saying that the purposes you're processing the data for should themselves be lawful. Worth noting as well that public interest of archiving data for historical or scientific research purposes, that's also, that's a valid purpose. So in addition to the stated purpose that you would have, those things are also interesting to people. But there are specific clauses in the GDPR about that.
Yeah. Can I jump
So,
in and just say
of
that
course.
historical interest archiving thing is sometimes used as, well, I haven't really got a good reason, so I'm just going to say it's that. That won't wash. It absolutely will not stand up. Unless that is your business and you're an established business doing that, you don't want to be trying to use that one. Okay. There are plenty of other gateways and legal purposes which absolutely will apply, so don't worry.
Thanks, Lucy. That's absolutely right. And I suppose allied with this is the idea of data minimization. So only processing the data that you need to process. So do you really need to collect, 100 pieces of information on each service user that you have? No, don't do that. Only collect and process the data that you need to for the purpose that you've got. And again, be explicit about what you're collecting. Being particularly careful as well about what are called protected characteristics or special category data. We'll talk quite a lot more about these later because they're quite heavily in use in the civic sector. Accuracy is the fourth principle. So it kind of goes without saying that you shouldn't be processing data which is wrong. Data quality, though, is a big problem in a lot of organizations. You get input errors, processing glitches, or just data going out of date. Quite a lot of issues are caused in both the commercial world and the civic sector by people moving, people dying, people getting married, people changing their local circumstances, and then the data that your organization holds about them has gone out of date and then it's wrong. The ICO say that you should take all reasonable steps to ensure that data is not incorrect or misleading. So we know that data quality is an issue, and this is why we've got a whole session on it next week. So look out for that one too. Principle 5, storage limitation. This is about keeping the data for as long as you need it to. So once you've used the data for your stated purpose, then you need to be letting it go. This is required really for you to be saying what this is. So it doesn't stop you from keeping records. It's about anonymizing where appropriate, but you're also allowed to decide and specify how long you'll keep those records as well. I know that there are statutory reasons in some areas, and particularly around safeguarding, but that's a specific case. Mostly you say how long you'll be keeping the data for and what the reason for that is, and then you put that in a policy, and and people are then clear about it. So bear in mind as well that data degrades over time. So if you keep personally identifying data for longer than a particular length of time, it becomes less useful to you. So you need to bear that in mind when you're designing these kinds of principles. Okay, principle 6 is security, and it's about keeping data safe, of course. Most organizations that work remotely need to work on their information security a bit more now, because this is, and now technically a lot of this is out of scope of this workshop, as it's quite a big project, quite a big topic. I mean, I suppose the really basic version of this is, changing your passwords regularly, keeping your software up to date, taking care, keeping staff training good, having up-to-date antivirus, those kinds of things. That's the 80% of the 80-20 rule, really, in this area. But most of data protection breaches statistically are the result of security flaws. So good policies and staff training, most of the battle here. And we obviously recommend that there are regular reviews of security. Even a very small outfit like us, and we're just a few people, and we subject ourselves to regular security testing, and we're accredited by, we use the Cyber Essentials scheme. There's a link at the end of these slides to that. That's all quite important, but it's not too onerous if you take a reasonable view of it. Okay, final principle is accountability, and this is about who's responsible. So you as an organization are responsible for maintaining the privacy of the personal data that you process. And that means you have to take responsibility, unfortunately, for what you do with that personal data and to comply with all the other principles, so, and also to keep records. There are definitions in the GDPR Act of data controllers and data processors. So the Act defines a data controller as being an organization with accountability for data protection. If that's a private company, then it's a board of directors that are responsible. In an unincorporated organization, that responsibility lands with the trustees or with the management committee. Data processors are subcontracted bodies who process data on behalf of controllers. So, for example, payroll providers, the controller is still accountable. If you hand off your payroll processing to someone else, then you're still accountable for that. If the payroll data goes missing, it's you that will receive the fine or the blame for that. Just bear that in mind, that you can't outsource accountability for the personal data that you collect and that you process and commission. So that's a very quick whiz through of the GDPR principles. We've talked quite a lot now about, we talked a bit about what it's trying to achieve. And I guess before we get into the detail of whether specific situations that you might have are compliant or not, we'd like to get you started. Thinking about what data your organization collects and processes. Here's an example of one of these canvases to fill out. I mean, the thing is, there's no one way to find out about all the data that your organization collects and processes, because there are different perspectives, and the more complex the services you provide, the harder it is to track things down. So in the long run, it's good to note things as you become aware of them. However, what we've tried to do is develop a method to get you started with this. And I guess some of you are going to be at different spaces on this. You may already have a list or a data catalog, a catalog of all the data that you're processing internally. Have a look at the blank canvas that I've sent in the chat. The example on the screen here is from a food bank. Now, we made this up. It's not real. None of us has got any idea how a food bank actually works. So it contains some fairly wild assumptions. Some of you may have much better experience of how food banks work, and you'll be able to tell me how that's working. But the idea here is to think about the services that you provide, the internal support functions the organization has, and the partners it shares data with. So there's the top three lines there. So for example, our food bank provides food packages to people. It also signposts people to support services. It has internal processes of communications, HR, finance, payroll. And it also shares data. It shares payroll data with HMRC. It shares data with DWP. It will share data with the Charity Commission and governance data and those kinds of things. And this idea is, so what we'd like you to do in your groups is to see if you can make a list somewhere on paper of the services that you think you provide, how and where you provide them. So are they online? Are they happening face-to-face? And then the data that's creating, are you recording things on paper? Are you storing them in a filing cabinet? Are you putting them in email? And just start to bring those things out. Now, a lot of organizations would have a very large number of these data sets, and I don't want you to get too worried about that. We just want to get a few out for now so that we can see how this would work. And so we can use them as examples, really. So we're not trying to boil the ocean here. In the long term, we'd like you to, eventually get to the point where you understand all the data that your organizations are collecting, of course, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing briefly. Does anyone have questions around that? Do we all know what we're doing? Okay. Do you want to start the breakout rooms, Lucy? And we'll be coming around and floating around to help you out and to chat with you as you do it. We're going to have 20 minutes or so for this this little exercise, so we've got plenty of time. Take your time and only try and capture one or two, maybe discuss it with the other people that you're in the breakout groups with. Is that okay? So we've been talking in, thanks. we've been talking in the breakouts this morning a bit earlier about individual data sets that you're collecting. And we sometimes, as a first step, we get people to record them on a spreadsheet, and it looks, it's a very simple one, and it looks a bit like this. So it's just like the business function that's around what service is being provided, or is it an internal process that's being used? Is there data sharing involved? Are you sharing that data with other people? How and where that data is collected, and the resulting data set that you've got. So someone was saying that they had they'd been doing some community engagement work in the breakout room I was in, and so that's kind of, you know, like service provision or market research. That, you know, the service provided is about community engagement. They're not sharing that data with anyone, it's just internal. How are they collecting that data? They're going out and they're talking to people face to face, and the resulting data set is something that ends up in their CRM function. So that's an example of how that would be recorded. And really what we're trying to do at this point is not overthink it. We just want to get the data out there. The more you think hard about the data you're collecting, sometimes you panic a bit and you think, oh, I've got to do this massive process for every single piece of data I've got. The most important thing, though, is that you share that, you know, is that you record that you're storing data and you're collecting data. Just stop that sharing, and I'm going to send people a link to that, which is in the chat now, as a Google Sheet. We will give you all of this stuff at the end of the course in like a downloadable package. So don't worry about getting all this working. I know that some people are using mobile devices and that, you know, won't render Excel spreadsheets very well. So don't worry about that if that's the case. But if you can do it, then great, do it as we go through the thing. So I think, shall we restart? I know there's a few people that are off camera, but we might as well get cracking again. What do you think, Lucy?
Unmute. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's crack on.
Okay, let's do that. So if I share my screen again. Okay. So we did this little exercise just before the break, and there was quite a lot of chat in the breakout rooms about the different data, and the issue that kept coming up was that, you know, was this right? Was this the right thing to do? And we had some questions in the break as well about whether that was the right thing to do, and we're going to get on to that. But what you need to build as an organization, and the first step of compliance really, is to record everything, and it's to record all the data that you are collecting and storing. And we'll provide you with, so there are two different levels of this that you can go to in terms of detail. One is the spreadsheet that I've just shared with everyone, which is a very basic template saying what data is being collected and where. The final goal of this, though, is to make a spreadsheet that will satisfy, you know, an organization that's like a regulator, like the ICO, which and they have a concept of a thing called a record of processing activities. And there's we've got a template for that. I've not shared it with you yet because I want to just go through the next thing, because the record of processing activities doesn't just say what data you're collecting, it also says the legal reason that you're allowed to collect and process the data. So this is the next step. And in order to do that, you have to understand a thing called the legal gateway. And a gateway is, as you might expect, this is the justification that you have to do that. So to record or process that piece of information. So legal gateways, but they're justifications for data processing. And it's one of these that will be cited, that you have to cite to allow you to continue processing the data. Now you only need one legal gateway to be valid, and there are sort of 8, but you wouldn't get involved in all of them, you should know which one it is and you should record it. So as we run through these, think about the data that you identified in the last exercise or other data that you've got and see if it would be covered by one of these use cases. So these are the legal gateways. There are 8 reasons for processing data that you can cite. Most organisations, 1 through 6 are where they are, but many civic sector organisations do possess special category data as well. We'll talk a bit about that as we get to it. I'm going to push through these fairly quickly because most of them are quite straightforward. We've also got a cheat sheet that we'll share with you, which is a little PDF that we'll share with you at the end of this little section. You will see columns when we get there on a record of processing activity. We'll have columns that records what legal gateways are. Don't panic about that yet. It should become clear. And we have a second exercise coming along, and that will help you fill those in with any luck. But I'm just going to run through those legal gateways now. Okay. First legal gateway is consent. So this is about putting them in charge, putting an individual in charge and saying, I'm going to collect your data and I'm going to use it for these purposes and ask them to agree to do that. You know, a genuine consent process would put people in charge of that. They build trust and engagement with those people, and it would enhance your reputation. If you say that this is the, it shows that you're being, that you're a legitimate organization that processes people's data honestly. Consent requires a positive opt-in. The 3 steps that the ICO say are ask, record, and manage. So ask for consent, record that the consent has been given, and also manage that consent in an ongoing way. So, there's a kind of a regular revisiting of that consent to make sure that it's still valid. It's the most visible of the legal gateways. You see it everywhere, from the cookie consent notices that you get people get on websites to tick boxes on online forms. It's okay to send you marketing information. You see that a lot when you're buying things online. A lot of people assume that this is the kind of gold standard of GDPR, and it's certainly powerful for sure. But I think in the civic sector, organisations shouldn't necessarily assume that it's the solution that they would necessarily default to. There are other options that you would need to consider as well. Many of our service users and our volunteers and collaborators either don't want to consent, they don't think it's appropriate to consent, or they simply can't consent, don't have the capacity to do that. Nevertheless, if you can do this process right, if you can do consent with people and get consent for processing their data, then do that. And if you do it right, it can build trust in your organization. So that's
I just jump in on that one.
Yeah.
The definition that I was given for obtaining consent is that it has to be active, explicit, and informed. Okay, so those 3 words are important. Active, meaning the user has to do something rather than not fail to not do something. Yeah, so dark patterns, as in, please untick this box if you don't want us to not contact you. All right, is that dark pattern where I don't even know what I'm agreeing to, but if I do nothing, maybe I'll be safe. Okay, it's got to be active. I've got to click the box that says, yes, I do want you to contact me, or yes, I do agree to you doing this thing. It's got to be explicit, as in, I agree you can do whatever you want, is not good enough. I agree that you can contact me by email is explicit enough. And then informed, if we have your data, we will do these things with it. Not, we're going to store your data, hope that's okay. Okay, so active, explicit, informed are the conditions for actually getting consent. You will be asked to prove that you've done that.
Thanks, Lucy. That's really useful. I think we know a bad kind of process when we see one, because we always have to read it twice or 3 times before we work out what it's actually asking us for, and those things are all frowned upon. So even if you manage the consent later, if it's not clear, the ICO would take a dim view of that if they looked at it. Of course, the ICO don't have eyes everywhere, they don't look at everything, but if they did, and you were doing something like that which was intended to fool people, then that wouldn't be legal. And obviously, as ethical organizations that try to help people, that's not the place that we want to be in at all. That's the opposite of the sorts of things we want to do. So I don't really need to tell this audience about it. It's just, but those things do exist out in the commercial world and in murky bits of the internet. So yeah, be aware of it. Linked to consent is contracts. So if you have to process someone's data in order to meet obligations to them by contract, then that kind of implies the consent that you sometimes have. So it's like a version of consent which is implied by contracts and pre-contracts. Now in the commercial world, this is things like sales. So for example, I have to know someone's email address in order to send them a quotation. And if people approach you as potential service users, but before they're service users, it applies here. So if someone contacts you and gives you their email address so that you can contact them about providing them with a service, then you're covered under this because it's an implied contract. They've shown a willingness to engage with you on that topic, and so you have to process, you have to use their email address in order to meet your obligations to them. Applies to that, and it only applies to their data though. Having said that, the processing that you do has to be necessary. So because someone approaches you with their email address because they want a service, does not give you the right to sell that email address on to someone else. So you should be explicit about what you'll do when people use like an online form on your website, and you should also record what you do with that information internally and the rationale for it. Of course, not everybody has capacity. This comes up with special category data later on. So you sometimes need to make a contract with someone's representative or with someone's family. That came up in a question that was asked in the break. So, and you also may well have clauses about data handling in your contracts with suppliers. So just bear that in mind too, because some of your suppliers might come in contact with service users, and there may be personal data in those contracts. So have a look at those as well. Often these are standard terms and conditions in contracting. Linked again, but in a slightly different way, if you have to meet someone's, if you have to process someone's data in order to meet law or legal obligations, so in non-contract situations, you have the right to do that too. So for example, you have the right to pass employee data to HMRC or to a payroll company in order to pay them for the work that they've done to you. You may have to report issues to law enforcement. You may have to comply with a court order, or you may have to comply with industry regulations. In some cases, you're regulated in some industries, and you have to give particular names up. For example, you have to give up the name of your data processing officer to the ICO as a contact point. This processing, though, has to be necessary. And again, you need to be explicit about it and record your decision and rationale. So that's all permitted. You shouldn't ever, there's no get out clause there where you say, you can't do this because of GDPR. It's not the case. It's important, though, to record it and also tell people that you're doing it if that's appropriate. Vital interests. So sometimes you have to process someone's data in order to protect them from harm or to protect their life. It doesn't apply if they're already in a position to give consent. There's some special category data that's linked with this. And of course, the processing must be necessary. So again, be explicit, record your decision and rationale. This sometimes happens with safeguarding cases and in medical situations too. Not an expert on these particular incidents, and special category data is most usually involved in these kinds of issues. Okay, I'm not sure if there's I think there's a public sector person here. Public task means processing people's data to carry out statutory public services. This usually applies to public bodies. Occasionally, a charity would carry out public duties on behalf of local authorities. However, normally when that happens, there's a data sharing agreement in place, and you would be already talking to the local authority's data protection officer. So they would make sure that you were covered in that situation. If you're processing data on behalf of a public body, then you're the processor and they're the controller. So that's always worth scoping out when that happens.
Can I just
Again,
butt in again, Martin?
yes, of course, Lucy.
Sorry, you're saying that they would make sure that you're covered. They'll make sure that they are covered.
Of course.
Read the document and make sure you understand and agree with and have capacity to agree to all of the things that they're asking you to do, because there will be some technical stuff in there about, you know, your platforms, your equipment, your devices, read the stuff. It will be good, it will be clear, and they're always happy to help, but their job is to make sure that they are covered legally at their end and they have been very clear to you about what's expected of you. So if it's not clear, ask.
Thank you. Yeah,
Information governance professionals love to talk about why these things matter. Ask, they'll tell you.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. They do love to talk about it. So, and they're very interesting people, of course, because information governance is interesting, obviously. Something else which is interesting is legitimate interests. So this is one of the more technical areas of the legal gateways that you might have. So this happens when it's not appropriate to ask someone for consent. You don't have a contract in place, but you need to process someone's data to carry out a non-statutory task. This looks like a charter almost to do what you want, but it's sometimes taken if the processing is clearly needed to be done, but all of these other options don't apply. So this means that you take responsibility as an organization for making sure that the data protection doesn't cause someone harm. And it's important to understand that this is if you take this option, you can do quite a few things with it, but you do take the accountability for if things were to go wrong. And it does put a big burden of proof on you to show that the processing you're doing has a net positive effect. So we've seen this actually in the environmental area, where individuals might report that a particular species is in a particular location, and an organization was recording that it was this person that recorded that species. It was important to them that that person was named because they were an expert in this particular species, and so that gave that species sighting a weight that they wouldn't have otherwise had. But they didn't feel that other people in that ecosystem would consent to giving their names up, and so they struck a balance of saying that they would look after the data that people had, and they would be anonymizing it in different places. And it's okay to do this, but there's quite a lot you have to do in order to make this work in a proper way. So you do have a legitimate interest. Someone earlier was talking about doing public engagement work in our breakout room, and again, this is a legitimate interest that they have. They're a community organization. They want to canvass people. They have to show that they've engaged with a certain number of people, and of people of particular types in their local area. They have a legitimate interest to show that they're doing that because they're providing a public benefit. So then the point is, that's the legitimate interest for processing the data. What is the minimum amount of processing that's necessary to achieve it? And how can you minimize the risk of harm to individuals when doing it? And that meant, in that case, lowering the resolution of the data. So not showing all the fields, not recording all the fields that a particular person was giving them, making sure that people couldn't be identified as individual people that were living in that particular area with that particular address. So there are things that you can do to make this work. But the onus is on you to prove that the processing is beneficial. So that's legitimate interest. And if you ever book a one-to-one with us, then and you've got a problem with that, then we can work through those issues with you. Okay, so the last legal gateway is about special category and criminal offence data, and often these are bundled together as a thing. If you work in the area of special category data, and what we mean by special category data is data that is about protected characteristics. So what I mean by that is like race or ethnicity, political opinions, religious beliefs, trade union membership, genetic data or biometrics, health data and data around sexual activity or orientation. These are all special category, they're all classed as special category data. We used to call this sensitive personal data. Now, to handle these, you need additional safeguards. So you would already be choosing one of the other gateways, and then you would be choosing a tighter version. But you would be choosing a more explicit version of consent, for example, or you would be citing a particular kind of employment law for processing that data. You'd be looking out for the vital interests of the data subject, but where they were physically or legally incapable of giving the consent. Perhaps they had a serious illness and didn't have the mental capacity to do it, for example. You might be processing, there's some exemptions here around processing internal member details within particular kinds of political organizations. Also, if the data has been explicitly and deliberately made public already by the data subject, not if someone else has outed them on social media, but if they've taken that approach themselves explicitly and voluntarily, or if it's needed by the courts or for judicial purposes. So there's a number of conditions around here. They're similar to previously outlined gateways, but they're applied more stringently. And so they also contain provisions for specialist occupations to practice. So counselling, for example, it comes under this category of special category data. There's a specific article in the GDPR about criminal records data. This is really only used under supervision of the criminal authorities. It's about criminal records. So you would need to take legal advice from those people if you were working with that. I don't know if you've got anything particular you want to add about these things, Lucy.
No, I don't think I do. I think that's covered it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So as a whistle-stop tour of legal gateways, in our previous exercise, we identified some of the data that your organization's processing. So what I want to do a short exercise now. We're going to establish the legal gateways you'll use for some of that data. So just for one of those elements of data that you're gathering, I want you to think about what we've done, what we've just been through. And then we'll give you sort of 10 minutes to do it, and then we'll ask you if you're comfortable with it to tell the group about it. This is about legal gateways and adding them to your list of data that you made earlier. I'm just going to stop sharing. We're all still here, which is good. I'm going to share. So we've got a cheat sheet for these things, which I'm going to share with you now because okay, so in the chat, there's a link to a Google Drive folder, and that links to a PDF file, and that's a sort of a quick reference guide that's got the principles that we talked about earlier and the legal gateways. I guess we'll restart. I'm just conscious of time and just want to make sure that we get through everything. Thanks for coming back, I suppose, first thing to say. The final leg of this afternoon's workshopping. I just wanted to share a couple of things, a screen. So there's a thing called a record of processing activities, which is a template document that the Information Commissioner's Office produced. And it's this document that we've been sort of working our way up to. So we've identified the data sets that, or at least one data set that you're processing in your organizations, and we've identified a legal gateway that we're using in order to process that. Now I'm just going to share my screen here because right, so I think everyone can see that. I hope everyone can see that. This is a spreadsheet in Google Sheets that I've got, which has got a number of elements to it. Now, I'm just going to run you through this, as this is a template. There's also an example on the next tab. We will share this with you later on in the, so that's my cat, right? So the blue areas and the blue things are not, they're not required by law for you to fill them in, but the other things are. So the data set, the purpose of processing it, the contact details of the controller, if applicable, the categories of individuals that you're recording the data about, the categories of personal data that are being shown here, categories of recipients of that data. So if you're sharing the data with someone else, who are you sharing it with? There's a couple of things about if you're transferring data abroad. Is anyone doing? If anyone's doing that, let us know in the chat, because I think it's, you know, it's a special case. Don't want to make a meal of it here because most people aren't doing that. How long will you retain that data for? The retention schedule. So a general description of any organizational or security measures that you might have around it. So is it like password protected? Is it kept in a secure location? All of those things. And then we're into what condition for processing we've got. So that's a message saying my internet connection's down. What's the legal gateway that you're using in order to process this data? It's the lawful basis that you have. And then there are links. So policy documents that you're working with, are you, is personal data being, you know, you just need to be confirming these things, and any reason for it not working. So for example, if you've deviated from the guidance in any way, that you note that, and the ICO asked that you note that honestly on these sorts of documents. I'm just going to walk you through a very quick example around this. So they've produced a bunch of stuff here. So payroll data, for example, there's no joint controller. In employees is the category of information that's being held. It's bank details, it's people's bank details. It's going and being sent to HMRC. There's no contract with HMRC to speak of, so that's not needed. It's not going out of the country. There's a retention schedule, so you hold on to HMRC sent data for 3 years after the person has left your employment. It's encrypted, so it'll be stored in an encrypted place and transferred. And you have a legal obligation to do that. Okay, they've given an article number here. That's not strictly needed, but it's belt and braces because this is what's come from the ICO. So all of these things. So they've put up a bunch of optional columns here. Where is there a legitimate interest for this? You know, what's the lawful basis? Is it legitimate interests or whatever? What rights are available for people? Are you able to let Millie into the waiting room, Lucy? Thanks. What subject matter rights are available to individuals in that case, and then a bunch of other kind of optional fields. These are the schedule for processing for special category data that they've got on this form as well. So that's not necessarily relevant in this case, but in some cases it is. So employment or contract data is available. We will share this with you anyway. What I would say is don't get worried about the details of some of this stuff that's written on there. There's some technical things about what article it refers to. Eventually, we'll get you into a point where you can fill that form in. And in fact, you've already got all the information you need in order to fill that form in. It's just some of the language might be doing it. I'm just looking in the. So someone's saying you believe your payroll's processed in India. That is interesting. So this is all about contract. So do they have a watertight contract with you that they will process the data in a particular, in accordance with UK law? That's the key thing there. Laurel, are you still around? I want to look a bit at tools and techniques, and the record of processing activities is the first of those that I just want to quickly talk you through. And then there's some other things that you might find interesting or useful in this space that we'll just go through quite quickly. And then we'll start to, we'll go back into breakout groups and we'll start to get an action plan together for each of your organizations about what you need to do next. Because that's the most important thing is where you are really, and not me waffling on so much. So just a few things that we want to cover off here, and might need a bit of help from Lucy in a couple of areas. So the record processing activities we've already talked about. So this is a simple list of data the organization collects, processes, or stores, the reasons it has for doing so. Also links to justifications for processing the data. So this is a key compliance tool. If you have one of these properly filled out and up to date, and you keep looking at it, then this is the document that the ICO may well want to look at. And we've been through a bunch of the fields in there already. A data map is a process which matches fields from one database in another. And I'm mentioning this here because a lot of the time we have data in multiple locations. So you might have a bit of data in a CRM database, for example, and then you will also have that information about the same person come in via an email or a web contact form. And what you end up with is 2 bits of data about the same person in different places in your systems. Always good to know if you have multiple systems, if you can match the data in one area with another. And this is something we'll cover in the data quality course that's running next week in some detail. But it's always good to know what the fields in your databases mean. So, and that's what we would call a data dictionary. So a data dictionary is just a list of all the fields that you're capturing. The example on this slide is of like footballers. So you have footballers in different leagues, but they all have common kind of.
I can't see your slides,
attributes.
Martin. Are you sharing?
Oh, I'm really sorry about that.
Sorry, I do that literally every time I deliver training. Like go to a breakout room, come back and forget that I haven't reshared my screen. It's just a thing.
I'm really, really sorry.
No, don't worry, mate. There we go.
Sorry, is that better? Hopefully you can see that. Good. Well, I'm getting a thumbs up from Lucy, which is all that matters. So yeah, so the example here that's shown is footballers in different leagues. And you know, they've all got names, wages, goals, the club that they're at, the value they're at, but they're all in different leagues. And so they have different clubs, but together that means the same thing in all those different databases. And similarly, someone will give their name and email address in a web form as they log into you, but they'll also have that information maybe in your CRM system. And it's worth making sure that you deduplicate those things or that they line up together. And data quality is, you know, it's one of those important things that we like to push because it's a basic really in order to do better analysis of the data that you've got. Data sharing agreement is a legal contract between 2 organizations to pool their data and to share data. So the thing about data sharing, that's quite common if you work in the public sector to have data sharing agreements so that organizations can collaborate with each other. And sometimes between public sector and civic sector organizations that happens. So there are 2 types of sharing agreement where we see it, or it's 2 types of data sharing that we see. So when 2 data controllers decide to work together, they have a data sharing agreement. If a controller and a processor work together, then that's a contract that includes a data processing agreement. So there's a bit of nuance there, but a lot of the time, if you're contracting with a council for social care, you can expect to be party to a data sharing agreement of some kind. If you need one of those, there are templates around, but they're not for amateurs to use really. You would need to take legal advice if you wanted to do that. I don't know if you've got things to add around that, Lucy, because I know you've worked with data sharing agreements quite a lot.
Yeah, and data processing as well. So the crucial thing, you need a data processing agreement if one of you is doing a task for the other that involves processing the data. If it's more of a case of we'll pool our data and do this thing together, then it's a data sharing agreement. And the simplest form of data sharing agreement that you'll see is an open data license. Yeah. So data sharing agreement is effectively a license that says you may use this data for this purpose. If it's open, anyone can use it for any purpose. If it's more restricted, this specific person who's signed this agreement may use this data just for this purpose. Data processing agreement will look like this person is being paid by me to do this job with my data, and when they're done, I stop giving them money and they give me my data back. Yeah. So it is basically a contract. It's a schedule of works that says you'll do this, but you'll do it in this way and you will look after the data in this way. So if you've been hired by somebody to do work for them and they give data to you for that purpose, it's data processing agreement. Does that clarify it? Yeah.
Thanks, Lucy. And yeah, and crucially, it doesn't absolve you of the need to have a legal gateway to use the data. You still need to have the legal justification to use the data and process it. So just worth bearing that in mind. Someone asked about privacy policies earlier, and I said I had a good one. Privacy policy is a statement of how your data will be used, and privacy policies are common on websites, and they state how an organization will collect, handle, and process the data that it has. It's a communications tool, and they're often used as a form of consent. But they have to be quite clearly signposted to act in this way. You can only consent explicitly in order to be effective. This infographic that's on the screen is actually coming from the ICO, and it's an infographic that accompanies their privacy policy on their website. So they say this is how they'll use your data if you interact with the ICO. It's a really nice kind of friendly way of putting it, and which saves you having to wade through enormous amounts of legalese. And this kind of thing is really good practice, as you'd expect from an organization that specializes in this. So a statement of what an organization will do with someone's personal data, that's the privacy notice. That's what that is. That's a privacy policy. I don't know if you've seen better other examples of that you'd want to signpost, Lucy.
Unmute. There we go. No, I like that one very much. I think it's case studies and examples are always good. Human beings work much better with narratives than they do with checklists. Let's face it. That's nice with the example, sort of putting it in place.
Yeah, that's great. And it's all linked to the user journeys that people will make. So if you interact with us in this way, this is what we'll do. And if you interact with us in this other way, we'll do this thing instead. And it's nice and easy to understand. So that's all good. I want to talk a bit about privacy impact assessments, because these need to be required every time there's a potential risk individual happens in the system. So as you were doing your identifying your data processing earlier and the legal gateways you were doing, one or two people had the legitimate interest thing. And in each of these cases, in all of those cases, you would need to do a privacy impact assessment. So this is something that's required whenever data processing is likely to result in a risk to an individual. So privacy impact assessment it's a process that helps to identify and minimize those risks. There's a template available on the ICO website, which I'm going to share in the chat in a minute. So I've got that, but I can't highlight it and access it at the moment. I'll share it at the end of these slides, and that template, and you also get that as part of the pack. So
I'll just jump in, Martin.
Yes,
There's a
of course,
question
Lucy.
in chat, which I don't think I can type fast enough to answer before we move on.
Okay.
So if you use a marketing agency to contact members about products and services, rather than an internal staff member making that contact, no, you don't need to go back to get explicit consent to talk to that member, because you, in that case, you are the controller. It's your data. You've got a contract with the marketing agency. They will be the processor for that task, but you're the data controller. You have made assurances about what will be done with that data. So the only reason you don't need to go back and get new consent is if you planned to use that data to do something different than the original thing that you got it for. Yeah. So if you ask the marketing agency to do this thing because you want to share information about products and services, and you've got data collected for that reason. If you then decided that actually you wanted to then contact all members about something else, you would have to look at whether when you got the members' information, you had said that's what you were going to do with their details. Yeah. So all these, they're quite specific. It's purpose. Were people informed that this is what would happen with their data, and did they consent to that? If the purpose changes, the consent you obtained in the first place isn't necessarily valid. Okay, does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Right. So let's move on. So I just wanted to summarize some of the things that you should be recording, or you should be trying to move towards recording at the very least. So what it is you're doing. So it's a kind of throwback to the record of processing activities. So who are the contact details in the organizations that you're sharing data with? What are you processing data for? Descriptions of the categories of individuals and categories of personal data that you're processing. Who are the recipients of the personal data? So who are you sharing that data with? Details of any transfers that you're making to other countries, and that came up earlier. And that also means documenting how you're transferring that information, which is something we didn't talk about when we were talking about the payroll processing. How's the payroll information getting over there into India, and what retention schedule you have on that data? And all of these things are things that you need to be recording as in order to comply with ICO rules, and they're all the things that are on that record of processing activity thing. There's one last thing, which is about what happens if something goes wrong. And I mean, there's quite clear guidelines for what you have to report. Normally, you'd only need to report a security breach. So if there was an information security problem, so if someone hacked into your systems, or if some of your data was stolen, there was a criminal act, in other words, that according to it, you don't need to report an individual mistake. You need to record it, but you don't report it if it's just an individual mistake with limited risk and impact. But if you have a security breach and someone does steal some of your data, you should record that. You should report that as soon as it's been verified, at least within 72 hours. There's a big section on the ICO website about this, and it's well worth your time to read it because you'd be on the hook. And it can be quite a scary thing. I've been involved in a couple of security incidents, and people go through various stages of panicking about it, and then sort of calming down and assessing exactly, like what has actually happened here. And you do need to go through that first. The main thing is that these things happen, and they're only really bad if you try to avoid facing up to the fact that they've happened. If they happen and you take prompt action and you look at it in the eye, if you like, then normally then you're limiting any impact that you would have on your organization to do it.
Let's just jump in and we promised we weren't going to scare people, Martin.
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right. We promised we weren't going to freak people out. This is supposed to be a reassuring session. Okay. But as Martin says, if it happens, the important thing is to own up, document what's happened, document what was supposed to happen and why it didn't. Yeah. And look at how you would prevent it from happening again. But simple mistakes, as long as they're immediately rectified, yes, record, but you don't need to report. It's big stuff you definitely do need to report. And I was also going to say about the previous thing about the filling in the record of processing. It looks terrifying. I freely admit it looks terrifying, but hopefully we've got you to the point where you can fill in most of that right here and now. Or sometime, it might take you half a day, a little bit of thinking, and maybe some quick, emails, reaching out to colleagues and going, I think this, but I might be wrong. What do you say? But you can fill in most of this right now. And then the rest of it is probably just a matter of going to the ICO's website and doing a little bit of a lookup. Oh, if it's this, it must be Schedule 1. Oh, it says here, this example, that's what I've got. Oh, that must be that one. That's Article 6.3. Okay, you have the information that you need. If not right now, then after a couple of quick conversations with your teams. All right, so you've absolutely, you can do this.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, this is not out of reach of anyone that's been on this call, really. Okay, I just wanted to talk one last thing about, and it's a bit of a truism, really. it's not realistic to expect you to go away and do it all straight away and be exemplars at it like immediately. There are always new things to learn. There's always stuff changing in your organization. There's always new things to understand, and there's always new data to look at and to look after and use. So it's really important that you regularly come back to this and you keep on improving and you keep on learning. You know, ask yourself, is new data coming up? Have your partnerships or your processes changed? Have there been any complaints or incidents? Has anything happened which has made you think that something's not really working in the way that it should? You know, we suggest that you review things regularly. You know, either whenever there's a significant change, or at least every 6 months, to have some kind of a review of what's going on with all your data and what data you're processing. And in this way, over time, you build up a more complex picture. Don't try and do everything straight away and then panic and think, oh, you can't do it because you haven't got everything. You know, don't panic about that. You won't get everything first time around. You'll get it over time. And the more people you talk to, the more you can add to your database of things that you're collecting. So with all that in mind, and now we're at 5 to 5, so I want you to start thinking about what you're going to do next, and building your own action plan. And I think, you know, because everyone around this, you know, on this call is different, in a different place, I think we should start by doing this on our own, individually, and just write things down on paper for now, and then maybe, if we can, if people feel like doing it, we can share some of the things that we've discovered. So I want you to start with this, with what your goals are. So what are you trying to, where are you trying to get to? Are you, as an individual, wanting to take on a long-term ownership of you know, data protection in your organization and data management in your organization, or are you looking to hand that over to someone else? In which case, what are you trying to achieve? Where do you need to get to in sort of 3 to 6 months? And try and be as specific as you can about it. You know, like, what would you do next? What action would you want to take now? What's the goal that you're trying to hit? Just take a couple of minutes to think that through. Write something down on paper, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
Yeah, just to add to that, it can be hard sometimes to think about what the thing is that you need to do. And a technique that I use is basically to say to myself, well, what is the next thing that needs to happen? Yeah. So if my goal is to get the brakes fixed on my car, but it's not happening because every time I go to book that appointment, I forget which garage it was my mate recommended. Actually, the next thing that needs to happen is I need to call my mate and say, what was the name of that garage? And do you have their number? Yeah. Sometimes little stuff like that can stop us. So what do you want to get done? Yes, absolutely. What's the next thing that needs to happen in order to make that possible?
Feel free to ask us questions in the chat whilst you're doing this. We'll give you a minute or two just to think that through, and then we'll move on to the next aspect of that. Okay. Okay. So once you've thought about that, think about actions. So what needs to happen in order to make that happen, in order to make that goal kind of reality? What obstacles do you think you'd have? Do you think you would have a problem? Do you need new skills or knowledge? Is there something missing from your organization at the moment or from your own personal network that could help that happen? Are there other people around that can help? And just a minute literally to think about that, and then we'll this is about the detail more, really. So the more you plan the details around this, the easier it is to actually overcome the problems and get it done. So I mean, I know, plans are useless, but planning is invaluable, I think someone said. And I promise I won't be a kind of like an American self-help guru type of person. That's definitely not who I am. Lucy's nodding.
I can testify it's absolutely not who Martin is.
Definitely not.
But he is
Okay,
inspiring nonetheless.
Of course I'm not. So, and the final thing to think about this is what are the most important things? So what are the priorities? So what are the most important things here that need to be done? So can it just like tag them or star them or something like that? And also what things need to be done first? Is there a sequence? Is there something that needs something else to be done? So what is that? And then I guess we've got an option really, and I'll see what people think in the room about whether we go into breakout rooms and feed that back to each other, or whether people want to feed back to the whole group.
I'd suggest breakout rooms because
Okay.
otherwise it's going to get unmanageable with a lot of people wanting
good,
time
yeah.
to talk. One more question in chat, which I think is a good point to answer. So are we data controllers, processors as an organization or as individuals in terms of accountability? Okay, so the organization has the accountability, but the organization would do well to assign some duties to an individual. But that doesn't then, they can't then like pass all the blame to that individual and use them as a scapegoat. The organization will bear any penalties. If the individual does something egregiously wrong and i.e. breaks the law, they can be prosecuted and the organization will be fined. I think that's the crucial difference if there are big problems. Who would be a data protection officer? Well, in my experience is whoever doesn't step back fast enough when management asks for a volunteer. Okay, but it's not essential to have one, but you need someone who's got an eye on that. And there are information management and governance professionals. In the civil service, it's a career pathway. Very highly respected. Information and records management and information governance. And there are professional associations. If you want to hire somebody with those skills, you will be very glad you did. That may not be an option for a lot of organizations, have a professional devoted just to that. But there will be courses that people can do if you want to be sort of skilled up a bit. And there are the templates and examples for all of the materials we've discussed today, and the even more detailed and esoteric ones that you can get. So who should it be? It's got to be somebody with extremely good attention to detail. Okay. Somebody who is able to sit down and focus on everything having been thought about. So you don't want energetic, bubbly ideas people in this role, right? You want completer finishers. You want people who will make sure that every T is crossed and every I is correctly dotted. Yeah, Russell, I know. This is why I am not an information governance professional, okay? But if you find somebody like that, treasure them, buy them chocolate on a regular basis and see that they are happy, because they will take a huge amount of that burden off of you. And they will be conscientious and they will check that things are in order and that things have been done correctly and in the right order. That was a massive ramble again. I apologize, but I hope that answered the question. Okay, lovely. Do you want to put us in breakout groups, Lucy? And then we can just give a bit of feedback to each other, and that'll take what up. So thank you for coming today, firstly. I found that really interesting, learning about you all, and I wasn't really sure what to expect, to be honest, when I came in, because I'd not been shared details of you all beforehand, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think we're always learning from each other as well. I'm learning from other people as well as the other way around. And this particular topic as well, because everyone's organization is different, everyone's data management and data protection needs are different. And so that's important to understand as well. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions. There are just principles that I hope we've got across to you. If I was to summarize what we've been through this afternoon, it's really about treating the people you come into contact with care and with respect, because their data represents them. And if their data is misused or falls into the wrong hands or is used in the wrong way, that has the potential to harm them. And that's the opposite of what you want to do as a civil sector organization. Your purpose is to help people and to look after them. And
I can't say that more often, really. If you're working in that spirit, you won't go far wrong. The other thing you need to do is to just document things, to write things down, to make things clear, to communicate clearly to people. And if you're doing both of those things, then again, you're not going to go too far wrong. I want to just share a couple of things that I would recommend for you. So there is a book, if you want to get into this in much more detail, it's a book by a chap called Paul Titcher, Data Protection for Voluntary Organizations. We'll send you these slides afterwards, so you don't have to worry about clicking on the link now. It's quite readable. You could probably read it in a couple of days, depending on how fast a reader you are. But it's well laid out, it's clearly communicated. Specific instances and issues that you might have to deal with are well communicated in that book, and we used some of it for constructing this course, but of course we did quite a lot of our own BAT as well on our own experience. The other thing, of course, that I have to signpost you to is the ICO's website. They have a very clear guide to GDPR and data protection, and I totally recommend that. I also mentioned earlier about information security and data security. Now, there is another Beyond course around this that Kat's already shared the link to, but we've been through the Cyber Essential scheme, which is a UK government scheme about improving data security, and it does the basics for you. And I'd recommend this if you haven't got an active information security program already. I would recommend that you do this, and it will help you, do the 80-20 bit, the 80% bit of the 80-20 rule in terms of information security. So thoroughly recommended it. Finally, I just want to hand you back over to, Kat, are you still on the call?
I'm still here, Martin. I'm just
Great.
going to post in the chat the link to sign up to one-on-one sessions, which are all welcome to. This has been a really in-demand topic area, and we felt we wanted to provide more time with the data place to respond to really specific needs that you might have. So you can sign up on the link that I've just shared. And what would be really great in the remaining time that we have, I first have to say is just thank you so much for engagement through this session. It's been a lot of information, brilliant facilitation, Martin and Lucy. And I've just seen like so much information being shared between organizations, which I think helps build confidence, and just really good to have the space to share some common challenges. So thank you so much for joining us today.